Welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe for the best Reddit creepypasta stories, perfect for bedtime chills. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the story. Summer holidays were supposed to be a break from school, a time to hang out, goof off, and maybe get into a little harmless trouble. My friends and I had always prided ourselves on being adventurous, and that particular summer, we were itching for something new, something thrilling. Little did we know, our thirst for excitement would lead us straight into a nightmare. It started innocently enough. We'd heard rumours about the old tunnels on the outskirts of town. They'd been abandoned for decades, remnants of some long-forgotten mining operation. Local legend had it that the tunnels were haunted, but we all dismissed it as typical small-town folklore. Still, the idea of exploring them intrigued us. We were 15, invincible in our own minds, and desperately bored. So, we made a pact. We'd check out the tunnels and see if there was any truth to the ghost stories. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon, we set out for the tunnels. There were 5 of us, me, Jack, Leah, Mike and Emma. Armed with flashlights, snacks and a couple of pocket knives, just in case, we trekked through the overgrown path leading to the entrance. The mouth of the tunnel loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, its jagged edges resembling the maw of some giant beast. We hesitated for a moment, the enormity of what we were about to do sinking in, but then Jack, ever the brave one, took the first step inside. We followed, our flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. The air inside was damp and musty, carrying the scent of earth and decay. Our footsteps echoed off the walls, amplifying the sense of isolation. The deeper we went, the more the outside world seemed to fade away, replaced by an oppressive silence. After what felt like hours of walking and exploring side passages, we stumbled upon an old, rusted metal door. Intrigued, we pushed it open and found ourselves in a small, musty room. The room was littered with debris. Broken wooden crates, tattered rags, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. But what caught our attention was an old wooden box sitting in the corner. Leah, always the curious one, opened it. Inside was a Ouija board. We exchanged excited glances. None of us really believed in the supernatural, but the idea of using a Ouija board in an abandoned tunnel was too tempting to pass up. We sat in a circle around the board, placed our fingers on the planchette and started to play. At first, it was just a game. We asked silly questions, like if any of us would ever get a girlfriend, or if we'd pass our exams. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out nonsense answers that made us laugh. But then, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, and an unsettling silence settled over us. Mike asked, half jokingly, if there was anyone there with us. The planchette moved to yes. We exchanged nervous glances, but continued. What's your name? Emma asked. The planchette moved again, this time with more force. It spelled out IMHIM. Imhim? Jack scoffed. What kind of name is that? What do you want? Leah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The planchette moved slowly, almost deliberately. Y-O-U, a shiver ran down my spine. We all felt it. Something was wrong. Jack tried to laugh it off, but it was forced. All right, who's messing with it? He asked, looking at each of us. We all denied it, our faces pale and serious. Maybe we should stop, I suggested, my voice shaking. But before anyone could move, the planchette shot across the board, landing on goodbye. The board flew out of Leah's hands, hitting the wall with a loud thud. We screamed and scrambled to our feet, our flashlights flickering as if responding to the fear coursing through us. Let's get out of here, Mike said, his voice trembling. We didn't need to be told twice. We bolted out of the room and back through the tunnels, our footsteps echoing like a stampede. But the tunnels seemed different, as if they were shifting around us. The way out wasn't where we remembered it, and panic set in. As we rounded a corner, we heard a sound that froze us in our tracks, a low, guttural growl, echoing through the darkness. We turned our flashlights towards the sound, but saw nothing. Run! Jack shouted, and we took off again, our hearts pounding in our chests. We finally found the entrance and burst out into the sunlight, gasping for breath. We swore we'd never speak of what happened, blaming it on our imaginations. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had unleashed something in those tunnels, something that wasn't going to let us go. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. We heard whispers in the dark, saw shadows moving just beyond our vision, and felt an unshakable sense of being watched. It was as if whatever we had summoned in the tunnels had followed us home. I started having nightmares, horrible, vivid dreams of being chased through the tunnels by something unseen but malevolent. The others experienced similar things, but we tried to ignore it, hoping it would go away. Then, one night, Leah disappeared. She had been acting strange ever since we played with the Ouija board, distant, jumpy, and paranoid. We thought it was just nerves, but when she didn't show up for school and her parents couldn't find her, we knew something was seriously wrong. We searched everywhere, retraced our steps to the tunnels, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The police were called, but they found no leads. We were questioned extensively, but we couldn't tell them the truth without sounding insane. So we kept our mouths shut, drowning in guilt and fear. As the days turned into weeks, the terror that gripped us only grew stronger. Whatever we had summoned, it wasn't done with us. And I had a horrible feeling that Leah was just the beginning. I began to see it in my dreams. A dark, twisted figure, lurking in the shadows of the tunnels, watching, waiting. Its eyes were empty voids, and its presence radiated malice. It whispered to me, promising that it would come for the rest of us. No matter where we hid, it would find us. We had unleashed something ancient and evil, and there was no escaping it. The days following Leah's disappearance felt like living in a waking nightmare. Her parents were frantic, the police were everywhere, and our once carefree summer had turned into something out of a horror movie. We did our best to stick together, hoping that whatever was happening would pass if we stayed close. But deep down, we knew the truth. We had disturbed something that wouldn't rest until it had claimed us all. Jack, Mike, Emma, and I became inseparable. We spent our days trying to keep our minds off what had happened, but at night, the fear was impossible to ignore. The dreams were the worst. Each night, I found myself back in the tunnels, the dark figure looming closer, its whispers growing louder. I could feel its cold, clammy breath on my neck, and every morning I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. One night, about a week after Leah vanished, I had the worst dream yet. I was running through the tunnels, the sound of my own footsteps echoing back at me, when I saw her. Leah stood at the end of the corridor, her eyes wide with terror. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. Instead, she raised a trembling hand and pointed behind me. I turned and saw the dark figure, closer than ever, its void-like eyes fixed on me. I woke up screaming. The image of Leah's horrified face burned into my mind. The next morning, I told Jack, Mike, and Emma about the dream. To my shock, they had all experienced something similar. Leah, always at the end of the corridor, always pointing at the dark figure. It was as if she was trying to warn us. We knew we had to do something, but we were just kids, terrified and out of our depth. That evening, we gathered in Jack's basement, the only place where we felt somewhat safe. We huddled together, whispering about what to do next. "We have to go back to the tunnels," Mike said, his voice shaking. "Maybe there's something we missed, some way to undo what we did." Emma nodded, though she looked terrified. "We have to try. We can't keep living like this." Jack was silent for a moment. Then he spoke up. "We need to bring the Ouija board back. Maybe if we destroy it, we can end this." I didn't like the idea of going back, but I knew they were right. We had to do something, and sitting around in fear wasn't helping. We decided to head back to the tunnels the next day, in broad daylight, hoping it would be less terrifying than going at night. The following morning, armed with flashlights, a crowbar, and sheer determination, we made our way back to the tunnels. The entrance looked even more menacing in the harsh light of day, but we pushed forward, our fear overridden by desperation. As we ventured deeper into the tunnels, The oppressive silence returned, wrapping around us like a shroud. We reached the room where we had found the Ouija board, and the sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. The board lay where it had fallen, seemingly untouched. We approached it cautiously, half expecting the dark figure to leap out at us. Jack picked it up, and for a moment we all just stared at it, unsure of what to do next. "Let's destroy it," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe that will break whatever curse we unleashed." We took turns smashing the board with the crowbar, each hit echoing through the tunnels like a gunshot. But as the board broke into pieces, I felt a surge of dread. What if destroying it wasn't enough? What if we had only angered whatever was hunting us? As we turned to leave, the temperature in the room plummeted. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and a familiar growl echoed through the tunnels. We froze, our flashlights flickering, the beam slicing through the darkness. The dark figure emerged from the shadows, its void-like eyes locked onto us. It moved slowly, deliberately, its presence radiating malice. We ran, our screams echoing off the walls. The tunnels twisted and turned, confusing us, making it impossible to find our way out. It felt like we were running in circles, the dark figure always just a step behind. I could hear its growl, feel its cold breath on my neck. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't dare stop. Finally, we burst out into the sunlight, collapsing on the ground, gasping for breath. We had escaped, but the terror lingered. We knew it wouldn't stop. It was relentless, and it was getting closer. That night, the dreams returned with a vengeance. Leah was there, her face a mask of terror. She pointed behind me, and I turned to see the dark figure, closer than ever. But this time, it spoke, its voice a chilling whisper that echoed in my mind. "You cannot escape me." I woke up screaming, and I knew that our ordeal was far from over. We had unleashed something ancient and evil, and it wouldn't rest until it had claimed us all. The shadow of the tunnels loomed over us, a constant reminder of the horror that awaited. And deep down, I knew that Leah's fate would soon be ours. In the days following our return to the tunnels, things grew worse. We were haunted not only in our dreams, but also in our waking hours. Shadows seemed to move on their own. Whispers filled the silence, and an ever-present feeling of dread hung over us. It felt like the dark figure was always watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. We tried to go about our lives as normally as possible, but it was impossible. Our grades slipped, we stopped hanging out with other friends, and our parents grew increasingly worried. Jack, Mike, Emma and I became even more inseparable, finding solace only in each other's company. We were the only ones who understood the horror we were facing. One evening, we gathered at Emma's house, trying to come up with a new plan. We had destroyed the Ouija board, but that hadn't stopped the entity from tormenting us. Jack suggested we try to find out more about the tunnels, hoping that uncovering their history might give us a clue on how to deal with the entity. We spent hours scouring the internet, looking for any information on the tunnels. Finally, we found an old article from the 1920s about a series of mysterious disappearances in our town. According to the article, the tunnels had been sealed off after several miners went missing, never to be seen again. There were rumours of strange rituals and occult practices, but nothing concrete. The article mentioned an old man named Harold who had survived the tunnels and might know more about what happened. Desperate for answers, we tracked down Harold. He lived in a decrepit house on the outskirts of town, a reclusive figure who rarely interacted with anyone. We showed up at his door, our fear and desperation palpable. After some coaxing, Harold agreed to speak with us, his eyes filled with a mix of pity and fear. "The tunnels are cursed," he said, his voice trembling. "The miners who went missing, they didn't just disappear. They were taken by something evil, something that dwells in the darkness. We tried to seal it off, but it's always hungry, always searching for more souls." He went on to explain that the entity we had encountered was known as Shady Man. It fed on fear and despair, drawing power from those who dared to enter its domain. According to Harold, The only way to appease Shady Man was to perform a ritual to banish it back to the darkness. He handed us an old, tattered book filled with arcane symbols and instructions for the ritual. "You must perform this ritual in the heart of the tunnels," he warned. "But be careful. Shady Man will do everything in its power to stop you." Armed with this new knowledge, we prepared for our final confrontation. We gathered the necessary supplies, candles, salt, and a knife to draw blood, an offering to appease Shady Man. We knew it was dangerous, but we had no other choice. Our lives were already a living hell, and we couldn't let the entity claim us one by one. The next night, we returned to the tunnels, our hearts pounding with fear and determination. The entrance seemed even more foreboding than before, the darkness inside impenetrable. As we descended into the depths, the temperature dropped and the oppressive silence returned. It felt like the walls were closing in on us, suffocating us with their presence. We reached the room where we had found the Ouija board, and I couldn't help but shudder at the memories. We set up the ritual, drawing a circle of salt on the ground and placing the candles at its edges. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled over us. We began the ritual, chanting the incantations from the book. The candles flickered, and shadows danced on the walls. As we chanted, a low growl echoed through the tunnels, growing louder and more menacing. Shady Man was coming. Suddenly, the candles went out, plunging us into darkness. Our flashlights flickered, and the shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around us. Shady Man's presence was palpable, its malevolent energy suffocating. "We have to finish the ritual," Jack shouted, his voice barely audible over the growing cacophony. We continued chanting, our voices trembling with fear. The ground beneath us seemed to tremble, and a cold wind whipped through the tunnels. Shady Man appeared, its void-like eyes glowing in the darkness. It moved towards us, its form shifting and writhing. We could feel its hatred, its hunger for our souls. It reached the edge of the salt circle, but it couldn't cross it. We had to keep it at bay. With trembling hands, I took the knife and made a small cut on my palm, letting the blood drip into the circle. The ground seemed to pulse with energy, and the shadows recoiled. We continued chanting, louder and more desperate, the incantations blending with the echoes of Shady Man's growls. Finally, with a burst of energy, the ritual reached its climax. Shady Man let out a deafening roar, and the tunnels shook violently. The shadows seemed to collapse in on themselves, sucked into a vortex of darkness. The air grew still, and an eerie silence settled over us. We collapsed to the ground, exhausted and trembling. The candles flickered back to life, casting a warm glow over the room. Shady Man was gone, banished back to the darkness from which it came. But as we made our way out of the tunnels, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only bought ourselves time. Shady Man's presence still lingered in the back of my mind, a shadow that would never fully disappear. We had survived, but at what cost? The tunnels had taken a piece of us, and the darkness would always be a part of our lives. As we emerged into the sunlight, I looked back at the entrance, a chill running down my spine. The nightmare was over, but the scars would remain, and deep down, I knew that Shady Man was still out there, waiting for the next unfortunate souls to wander into its domain. We thought we had won. For a brief moment, we believed that the ritual had banished Shady Man for good, and that our lives could return to some semblance of normalcy. But we were wrong, terribly wrong. The darkness we had faced in the tunnels was nothing compared to what awaited us in the days that followed. At first, things seemed to get better. The nightmares subsided, the shadows stopped moving, and the oppressive feeling of being watched began to fade. We even dared to smile and laugh again, trying to reclaim our lost summer. But it didn't take long for the horror to return, more insidious and relentless than ever. It started with Mike. One night, he called us in a panic, his voice trembling. He said he had seen Leah. She was standing at the foot of his bed, her eyes wide and filled with terror. Before he could say anything, she disappeared. We rushed to his house, but found nothing. He was visibly shaken, and we did our best to comfort him. even though our own fear was mounting. The next day, Emma began hearing whispers. They followed her everywhere, at home, at school, even in broad daylight. The voices were low and unintelligible, but they filled her with a deep sense of dread. She couldn't escape them, no matter how hard she tried. Jack was next. He started seeing shadows out of the corner of his eye, dark figures that seemed to melt into the walls whenever he turned to look at them. He became paranoid, jumping at every sound and constantly looking over his shoulder. We tried to stay strong for each other, but it was clear that Shady Man was back, and it was targeting us one by one. I wasn't spared either. The nightmares returned, more vivid and horrifying than before. In my dreams, I was back in the tunnels, running from Shady Man. But no matter how fast I ran, it was always just behind me, its cold breath on my neck, its growls echoing in my ears. I woke up every morning drenched in sweat, my heart pounding with terror. We realized that the ritual hadn't banished Shady Man. It had only angered it. It was playing with us, wearing us down, feeding on our fear. Desperate for answers, we decided to visit Harold again, hoping he could help us find a way to truly defeat the entity. When we arrived at Harold's house, we found it in disarray. The front door was ajar, and the interior was a mess, as if someone had ransacked the place. We called out for Harold, but there was no answer. Cautiously, we ventured inside, searching for any sign of him. We found Harold in the basement, sitting in a circle of salt, surrounded by candles. He looked frail and terrified, his eyes darting around the room as if he were seeing things we couldn't. He told us that Shady Man had been haunting him ever since we performed the ritual. It had driven him to the brink of madness, and he was barely holding on. "There's only one way to stop it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You must find the source of its power. Deep in the tunnels, there's a hidden chamber. That's where Shady Man draws its strength. Destroy the source, and you'll banish it for good." Armed with this new information, we prepared for one final journey into the tunnels. We gathered our supplies, flashlights, salt, candles, and the tattered book with the ritual instructions. We knew it was dangerous, but we had no choice. Shady Man was relentless, and if we didn't stop it, it would consume us all. The next night, we made our way back to the tunnels, our hearts heavy with fear and determination. The entrance loomed ahead, a gaping maw that seemed to beckon us into its depths. We took a deep breath and stepped inside, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The journey through the tunnels was even more harrowing than before. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the walls seemed to close in on us. We followed Harold's instructions, searching for the hidden chamber. The deeper we went, the colder and darker it became, as if we were descending into the very heart of the earth. After what felt like hours, we finally found the chamber. It was a small, circular room, the walls covered in strange symbols and ancient carvings. In the center of the room was an altar, and on it lay a black, pulsating stone, the source of Shady Man's power. We set up the ritual, forming a circle of salt around the altar and lighting the candles. As we began to chant, the air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled over the chamber. We could feel Shady Man's presence, a dark, malevolent force that seemed to permeate the very walls. The shadows in the chamber began to move, coalescing into Shady Man's form. It stood at the edge of the circle, its void-like eyes fixed on us. We continued chanting, our voices trembling with fear but filled with determination. Shady Man roared, a deafening sound that shook the very ground beneath us. With a burst of energy, we reached the climax of the ritual. I took the knife and made a small cut on my palm, letting the blood drip onto the black stone. The stone pulsed with energy, and Shady Man let out a blood-curdling scream. The shadows writhed and twisted, sucked into the vortex of darkness that formed around the stone. The chamber shook violently, and for a moment it felt like the very earth was going to swallow us whole. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. The shadows were gone, and the air grew still. Shady Man had been banished, its power destroyed. We collapsed to the ground, exhausted and trembling. The candles flickered back to life, casting a warm glow over the chamber. We had done it. We had defeated Shady Man. As we made our way out of the tunnels, a sense of relief washed over us. The nightmare was finally over. But as we emerged into the sunlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that Shady Man's presence still lingered in the back of my mind. A shadow that would never fully disappear. The tunnels had taken a piece of us, and the darkness would always be a part of our lives. We had survived, but at what cost? The scars would remain, and the memory of Shady Man would haunt us forever. But we had faced the darkness and won, and that was something no one could take away from us. In the days following our final confrontation with Shady Man, we tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. We told ourselves it was over, that the entity had been banished for good, but the experience had left deep scars, both physical and emotional. We had changed, marked forever by our encounter with the darkness. At first, things seemed to improve. The whispers stopped, the shadows ceased their unnerving movements, and we no longer felt the oppressive presence of Shady Man watching us. We began to rebuild our lives, reconnecting with family and friends, trying to salvage what was left of our summer. But the nightmares never fully went away. Each of us continued to have vivid, horrifying dreams, always set in the tunnels, always with the lingering presence of Shady Man just out of sight. We didn't talk about it much, each of us trying to cope in our own way, but it was clear that the terror we had faced had left an indelible mark. One night, a few weeks after our final visit to the tunnels, I woke up to a familiar, chilling sensation. The air in my room was frigid, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe with a life of their own. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was Leah. She looked just as she had in my dreams, terrified, pointing at something behind me. I turned, expecting to see Shady Man, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at Leah, she was gone, leaving only the lingering feeling of dread. I knew I couldn't face this alone, so I called Jack, Mike, and Emma. We gathered at my house, sharing our recent experiences. To my horror, they had all seen Leah as well, each visit more vivid and terrifying than the last. It was clear that something was still very wrong. Desperate for answers, we decided to visit Harold one last time. When we arrived at his house, we found it abandoned. The windows were boarded up, and the air around the place felt thick with foreboding. It was as if Harold had vanished without a trace, leaving us to face the remnants of Shady Man's curse alone. With nowhere else to turn, we decided to return to the tunnels one final time. We had to know if there was something we missed, something that could explain why we were still haunted. Armed with flashlights and our unshakable determination, we made our way back to the entrance that had become all too familiar. The tunnels were just as dark and foreboding as ever, but this time there was a sense of finality. We navigated the twisting passages, retracing our steps to the hidden chamber where we had destroyed the black stone. The room looked just as we had left it, but the oppressive energy had returned, stronger than before. As we stood in the chamber, the air grew colder, and a low, menacing growl echoed through the tunnels. The shadows began to move, coalescing into Shady Man's form once more. But this time, something was different. The figure of Leah appeared beside it, her eyes filled with sorrow. Shady Man spoke, its voice a chilling whisper that echoed in our minds. "You cannot escape me. I am eternal, and so is your fear." Leah stepped forward, her ghostly form shimmering in the dim light. "You have to let go," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You have to face your fear and release it. Only then will you be free." We looked at each other, understanding dawning on us. We had been holding on to our fear, letting it consume us, giving Shady Man the power to haunt us. It was time to let go. We formed a circle, holding hands, and began to speak our fears aloud. We acknowledged the terror we had faced, the guilt we felt for Leah's disappearance, and the way Shady Man had twisted our lives. As we spoke, the air grew warmer, and the shadows began to recede. Leah smiled, her form becoming more solid, more real. "You're doing it," she said. "Keep going." We continued, our voices growing stronger, more confident. The chamber filled with light and Shady Man's form began to dissolve, its growls fading into the distance. With one final burst of energy, we released our fear, and the entity was banished, this time for good. The light in the chamber grew blinding, and we felt a warmth wash over us, a sense of peace we hadn't felt in months. When the light faded, Leah was gone, and the chamber was empty, save for the faint echo of our voices. We made our way out of the tunnels, the oppressive darkness replaced by a sense of calm. The sun was rising as we emerged, casting a warm glow over the landscape. We had faced our fear and defeated Shady Man, not with rituals or weapons, but with the strength of our own resolve. As we walked back to town, we knew we would never forget what had happened. The scars would remain, but they were a testament to our courage and resilience. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, forever changed, but no longer haunted. The nightmare was over, and we were free. It all started one chilly autumn evening, when I returned home from work to find a package sitting on my doorstep. There was no note, no indication of who it was from, just a plain brown box with my name scrawled on the top in messy black ink. Curiosity piqued, I brought it inside, thinking maybe it was something I'd ordered and forgotten about. When I opened the box, I found an old wooden Ouija board inside. The planchette was there too, looking ancient and worn. I had always been skeptical about such things, but there was something about the board that sent a shiver down my spine. Still, I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably a prank or a weird gift from one of my friends who knew I liked horror movies. I set the board on a shelf in my living room and promptly forgot about it. Days went by without incident, and I didn't give the board another thought. That is, until strange things started happening around my apartment. It began subtly. I would hear faint whispers in the middle of the night, just on the edge of my hearing, making me question if I was really hearing anything at all. Then, objects in my apartment would be in different places than where I had left them. I convinced myself it was my imagination, or that I was just being forgetful. But the incidents grew more frequent and harder to ignore. One night, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a soft, dragging sound coming from the living room. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. The sound was faint, like something being slowly pulled across the floor. Gathering my courage, I got up and crept towards the living room, my heart racing in my chest. As I turned on the light, everything seemed normal at first glance, but then I saw it. The Ouija board, which I had left on the shelf, was now lying in the middle of the living room floor, the planchette resting on top of it. A chill ran down my spine. There was no way it could have moved on its own. Feeling a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to put the board back on the shelf and go back to bed. Maybe I had moved it and forgotten, or maybe there was some rational explanation. But as I tried to sleep, the whispers grew louder, and I could swear I heard my name being called. The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted. The events of the previous night weighed heavily on my mind, but I tried to go about my day as usual. When I returned home that evening, I found the Ouija board once again in the middle of the living room floor. This time, there was no denying it. Something was very wrong. I decided to do some research on the board. I read stories online about people who had experienced paranormal activity after using a Ouija board. Some claimed to have contacted spirits, while others reported more sinister encounters. The more I read, the more uneasy I felt. That night, the whispers started earlier, as soon as the sun went down. The air in my apartment felt heavy, oppressive. I could feel an unseen presence watching me, waiting. Desperation drove me to take the board out of its box and set it up on my coffee table. Maybe if I used it, I could find out what was happening. With trembling hands, I placed the planchette on the board and lightly rested my fingers on it. I took a deep breath and asked, "Is there anyone here who wants to communicate?" At first, nothing happened. The planchette remained still, and I felt a small sense of relief. But then, slowly, It began to move. My heart pounded as it spelled out, Y-E-S. I asked, "Who are you?" The planchette moved again, spelling out a name, M-A-R-K. "Mark," I said. "Why are you here?" There was a long pause before the planchette started moving again, this time more forcefully. H-E-L-P-M-E. A chill ran through me. "How can I help you?" I asked. The planchette spelled out, K-I-L-L-E-D. My blood ran cold. "Who killed you?" I whispered. The planchette moved swiftly. M-O-T-H-E-R. I felt a wave of nausea. "Why are you in my apartment?" I asked, my voice trembling. The response came quickly. H-I-D-I-N-G. "Hiding from what?" I asked, my fear mounting. The planchette spelled out one final word before stopping abruptly. E-V-I-L. At that moment, the temperature in the room plummeted and the lights flickered. I felt a cold, malevolent presence closing in around me. I looked up and saw a dark figure standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. Paralyzed with fear, I could only watch as it slowly advanced towards me. Suddenly, the figure vanished, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I sat there, shaking, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The Ouija board lay silent on the table, the planchette still. I knew then that I had to get rid of the board, but deep down, I feared it was already too late. The evil presence had found me, and I didn't know if I could ever escape it. That night I barely slept, haunted by the image of the dark figure and the words the Ouija board had spelled out. I could feel the malevolent presence lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As dawn broke, I made up my mind. I would find a way to rid myself of the board and the evil it had brought into my life. But little did I know, my nightmare was only just beginning. The following day, I decided to get rid of the Ouija board. I figured that if I destroyed it, maybe I could rid myself of whatever malevolent spirit had attached itself to me. So I grabbed the board and the planchette, drove out to a secluded spot by the river, and threw them into the water. I watched as the board floated away, carried by the current until it was out of sight. I felt a momentary sense of relief, hoping that my life would return to normal. But that night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They were no longer just in the corners of my mind, but seemed to fill the entire apartment. I could make out fragments of words, a chorus of voices, all speaking at once. It was as if the very walls were alive, vibrating with an unseen energy. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew better. I had disturbed something, and it wasn't going to let me go that easily. As the hours dragged on, the whispers grew more coherent, forming words and sentences that chilled me to the bone. "Why did you abandon me?" one voice asked, echoing in the silence. "I need your help," another pleaded, sounding desperate and anguished. And then, a more sinister voice joined in, dripping with malice. "You can't escape." I felt trapped, my apartment no longer a safe haven but a prison. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking presence, every sound a reminder of the unseen forces at play. Exhausted and terrified, I resolved to seek help. But who could I turn to? My friends would think I was crazy, and I couldn't exactly call the police about ghosts. In desperation, I reached out to a local paranormal investigator I found online. Her name was Emma, and she had a reputation for dealing with the supernatural. I sent her a detailed email describing everything that had happened. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately, agreeing to meet me the next day. Emma arrived at my apartment early in the morning. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with a calm demeanor that put me at ease. She carried a large bag filled with various tools and instruments, some of which I didn't even recognize. After I recounted my story, she nodded thoughtfully and began setting up her equipment. She placed several devices around the apartment, explaining that they would help detect any paranormal activity. Then, she pulled out a small handheld recorder and asked me to sit with her in the living room. "Let's try to communicate with whatever's here," she said. "I need to understand what we're dealing with." We sat in silence for a few moments, and then she began asking questions. "Is there anyone here with us? Can you tell us your name?" At first, There was no response. But then, the temperature in the room dropped, and the air grew heavy. The recorder picked up faint whispers, growing louder with each passing second. "Who are you?" Emma asked, her voice steady. The response was chilling. "Mark, Mark," Emma repeated. "Why are you here?" The recorder captured a garbled reply, but we could make out the words killed and mother. Emma's eyes widened. "Can you tell us more? What happened to you?" The whispers grew more frantic, overlapping one another. "Hiding. Evil. Can't escape." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a shadowy figure appeared in the corner of the room. It was the same dark presence I had seen before, its eyes glowing with malevolence. Emma stood up, her face pale but determined. "We need to cleanse this place," she said. "Whatever's here is not just a restless spirit, it's something much darker." She pulled out a bundle of sage and began walking through the apartment, chanting softly as she waved the smouldering herbs. The air grew thick with smoke, and the whispers turned into anguished cries. The dark figure seemed to writhe and twist, as if in pain. I followed her, feeling a mix of hope and fear. The ritual took over an hour, and by the time she was done, the atmosphere in the apartment felt lighter, the oppressive presence seemingly gone. Emma turned to me, her expression serious. "I've done what I can, but you need to be careful. This entity is powerful and dangerous. If it returns, you may need to take more drastic measures." I thanked her, feeling a sense of relief. For the first time in days, I slept soundly that night. The whispers gone, the shadows no longer menacing. But my relief was short-lived. The next morning, I found a note on my kitchen table. It was written in the same messy black ink as the package, and it sent a chill down my spine. It read, "You can't get rid of me that easily. I'll always be with you." I felt a cold dread settle over me. The malevolent presence was still there, lurking, waiting, and I knew that whatever it wasn't done with me yet. The days that followed were a blur of fear and anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in broad daylight. Every time I entered my apartment, I felt a palpable sense of dread, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. The note had shattered any sense of safety I had, and the whispers had returned, more insistent and menacing than ever. Desperate for answers, I reached out to Emma again. When I told her about the note, she agreed to come back, but her voice carried a weight of concern that made my stomach churn. When she arrived, she brought along a man named Father Michael, a priest who specialized in exorcisms. His presence brought a sliver of hope, though the gravity of the situation was not lost on me. Father Michael walked through my apartment, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers. Emma set up her equipment once more, this time with a more extensive array of tools designed to detect and combat malevolent entities. The air grew heavy with tension, every creak and groan of the building amplifying my nerves. We gathered in the living room, where the Ouija board had first made its presence known. Father Michael placed a crucifix on the coffee table and lit several candles, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emma set up her recorder and motioned for me to sit with them. Father Michael began to pray, his voice steady and firm. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command any evil presence in this place to reveal itself and be gone." The temperature in the room dropped, and a low, guttural growl emanated from the shadows. The candles flickered violently, and the oppressive presence grew stronger. Emma's recorder captured a series of distorted whispers, growing louder and more agitated. Father Michael continued, undeterred. "By the power of Christ, I command you to leave this place and never return." Suddenly, the shadowy figure materialized once more solid and menacing than ever. Its eyes burned with a malevolent light, and it seemed to pulse with dark energy. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of voices, each one filled with anger and pain. Emma held up a small vial of holy water, her face set in grim determination. "You need to confront it," she said to me. "Ask it what it wants. You need to be strong." My heart pounded in my chest as I faced the entity. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice trembling but resolute. The figure's eyes bore into mine, and the voices coalesced into a single chilling response. You. A wave of terror washed over me, but I knew I had to push forward. Why are you tormenting me? I demanded. The entity's form flickered, and for a moment I saw the face of a young boy, Mark. His eyes were filled with sorrow and fear. She won't let me go, he whispered. She wants me to suffer. Father Michael stepped forward, holding out the crucifix. In the name of Christ, I command the spirit of Mark to be freed from this torment. And you, he said, turning to the dark figure, you have no power here. Leave now and return to the darkness from whence you came. The entity let out a deafening screech, and the lights in the apartment flickered wildly. The oppressive force seemed to pull at my very soul, but I felt a surge of strength and determination. You can't have me, I shouted. I won't let you control me. Emma threw the holy water at the entity, and Father Michael pressed the crucifix forward. The figure writhed and twisted, its form disintegrating into a swirling mass of darkness. The voices rose to a fever pitch, then abruptly fell silent. The candle's flames steadied and the air grew lighter. The dark presence was gone. I collapsed to the floor, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and exhaustion. Emma and Father Michael helped me to my feet, their faces etched with concern and sympathy. It's over, Father Michael said softly. The entity is gone. Emma nodded, but her expression remained serious. You need to stay vigilant. Sometimes these things can leave a residual energy behind, but for now, you should be safe. I thanked them both profusely, feeling an immense weight lifted from my shoulders. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I slept peacefully, free from the whispers and the shadows. In the days that followed, I took steps to cleanse my apartment further, using sage and other protective measures Emma recommended. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, and I began to feel like myself again. But I knew I would never forget the experience. The fear and the darkness had left an indelible mark on my soul, a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown. And though the entity was gone, the memory of its malevolent presence would haunt me forever. I never found out who left the Ouija board on my doorstep or why, but I learned a valuable lesson. Some things are best left alone. Curiosity may lead us to places we never intended to go, and the darkness that lurks beyond our understanding is very real. As I write this, I'm filled with a sense of closure, but also a lingering unease. The supernatural is not something to be trifled with, and I hope my story serves as a warning to others. Be careful what you invite into your life. You never know what might answer the call.